Well, it's our last go-round at this specific venue. So next week, we want to invite you back to church at 126 St. Felix Street in downtown Brooklyn. So just a few blocks away. We'll see you there next time. But for now, let's have an observant moment and wait on the presence of God. You know, the only thing that makes preaching really interesting is God. It's God's word, it's God's spirit, and otherwise it's just a book club, right? Like you just had an academic lecture, you know, if like God is not a part of the activity. Same thing with worship, right? If God's not a part of our worship and our singing, it's really just more like Christian karaoke. There's nothing really special or, you know, spiritual about it. Like we've really got to be more than just the sum total of our parts here. We really are. There's an open seat for God at a healthy worship gathering, an open seat. You know, we don't have all that we need until God really enters the picture. You know, when you go to a restaurant and you got a table for 6, but only 5 of you are there, and they say, "Is your complete party present?" You know, you say, "No, there's someone missing, and we're not going to move until we have everyone present." That's how a healthy worship service relates to God. Like we aren't complete here until the presence of God is clearly among us, and that's who we're depending on for these next few moments. As we study the scriptures today, we're going to look at the character of Moses. We've reached at long last the Old Testament character of Moses. I don't know that we've ever in the history of Mission City actually taken a whole Sunday and studied this particular character, but he's mentioned dozens and dozens, perhaps even hundreds of times throughout the Bible. He's a key figure, and one of these parents of ours who was indeed flawed. So we're going to study and have been studying the Old Testament figures one at a time. We won't be able to get through all of them, but we've been looking at the men and women of the Old Testament, and we've said, okay, they're kind of like our parents because they came before us in faith, and yet they're all flawed, and we'll see that as if you an honest reading of the Bible will tell you that all of the Old Testament heroes are actually flawed people, you know. Now, a child's reading of the Old Testament will tell you that these are all perfect heroes enshrined in gold statue type mindset, but an honest adult reading of the scripture will reveal quite a few flaws in these heroes that we see. So that's what we've been doing week to week as Flawed Parents. And today we're going to, at long last, come to Moses, just an unskippable figure, you know, in the Old Testament. He lived in about 1500 BC. He's responsible for the first 5 books of the Bible, the original author of most of the first 5 books of the Bible. And so much so that the New Testament calls the law of Moses, because that's the voice that God used to breathe it into existence. And when God wrote the first 10 commandments, he handed it on a tablet to Moses. So he had a very key role. And we're going to study, there's so many ways you could study Moses. There's so many angles you could take. There's so many moments from his life. We've got one Sunday, and so I'm going to study him today from the angle of leadership. And we all have human leaders. Some of us are leaders. We aspire to be leaders. This message today is about healthy leaders. So that's going to be the lens through which we look at Moses over the next half hour or so, and we're going to say, okay, where is he healthy, and where is that a template for what healthy leaders always do, and where is he unhealthy, and where is that a template for what unhealthy leaders always do? Because here's the thing, we are all in a relationship with human leaders. Everybody has human leaders. Don't be in denial, don't be naive, don't be claustrophobic. It's just a fact of life. Everybody's got human leaders. Some people are trying to do the, you know, but I'm American. You have leaders. Like you know, you're not that free. Nobody's that free from human leaders. You know what I mean? Everybody has leaders, okay? That's part of life. And a bad leader is like a fog in the room, like where you can't really make sense of yourself or them or your experience. It's just confusing. You ever had like a boss that was like, you just didn't know what you were going to get? And you just, it was emotionally weird, and it was really anxiety producing, and you didn't know what mood they were going to be in or how your words or actions were going to be interpreted. It was high highs, low lows. It was passive aggressive. Any of you ever had that boss? Well, that's like a fog in a room. Like you go to work and it's like trying to navigate through something. But good leaders, like a fan that blows that out of the room, and then everything all of a sudden becomes so clear, you know, everything all of a sudden becomes so obvious, and the next step seems to make sense for a change, and so on. So bad leaders and good leaders give people a direct experience in defining the reality that they come into every single day. And we know this at a parental level, it's true. Sometimes we grow up and look back, and then we realize with adult eyes, okay, here is how those who were most influential in my home were or were not healthy. And the environment that created for me was directly downwind from their health level. Like we all grew up in an environment, and the health of that environment was directly downwind from the health, or lack thereof, of the parents who were shaping that environment. That's the blessing and curse of leadership. You're the most influential person in the room for somebody. And so whether that is used for good or for ill can sometimes remain to be seen. By the way, I'm hopeful that this is also helpful from a choosing leaders perspective. Statistics show that, and experience shows that most of you are on the move. Some of you, maybe Mission City Church will be your last church. Like you will live and die here, for the rest of your days. Most of you, experience and statistics show, are on the move somewhere. Whether 2 years from now or 12 years from now, there's going to be a job assignment in some other city, or God's going to do a new thing and you're going to go back to wherever you're from if you're not from New York City, or maybe you leave from here and go plant a church, start a different one. Who knows, what God might do. But probably, and I would love to be wrong, by the way. Anybody wants to lock arms for life? Let's do that. I'm a shameless recruiter. Okay, I want you here. Don't think I don't want to seem overly generous here. I'm as stingy as every other pastor. Okay, I want everybody to stay right here. I'm teasing with that. But I will say, I'm assuming that at some point you're going to need to evaluate another pastor. And you're going to need to know, what grid through which should I think? Is this a healthy leader or not? Like, what signs can you tell when you're choosing a church? Like, is this a good place? Some of you might even try to get hired on a church staff. Is this a good place? As we look through Moses' life, we might be able to get some criteria here. It happens to be that we have the privilege in our country and the stress of choosing a leader. So what's a healthy leader comprised of? What's an unhealthy leader comprised of? We're in that blessed and stressed year where we get to do that again. What a joy. So here we are getting to evaluate that. Side note on that. Some people are like, is it okay to vote for the lesser of two evils? And I'll just tell you this, until Jesus runs for office, you're voting for the lesser of two evils. Like every human being has an evil imprinted on their heart. It's just a matter of evil A, evil B, that's just what it is. So you can brace for that. So without further ado, let's look at Moses and let's see where do we see what healthy leadership would be and where do we not? And be aware that these things can be applied to parenting, workplace, ministry, who knows, right? Very broad here. So let's study Moses. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him. Now, in the Old Testament, when it says angel of the Lord, it's very loose in terms of, is that a separate entity from God or is it just God? And sometimes you'll see the angel of the Lord appear as like a distinct entity and say things like, thus says the Lord, like I'm a messenger reporting to you. And then the angel of the Lord sometimes will just say I, like I say to you. Sorry, that didn't get it done. Sorry. Okay, I think we're good now. So the angel of the Lord sometimes will speak as on behalf of God and sometimes as God himself. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked. Okay, so we've got a bush on fire. Okay, you got that in your mind? Bush on fire. Okay, so this is either a teenage prank, but there's no teenagers around, so like something is going on. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. So if you imagine, I'm imagining something knee-high, waist-high. I don't know, it doesn't tell us how big this was, but I'm envisioning something that if it was to catch on fire, like with conviction, like you can feel the heat, it probably wouldn't last long. It would burn up and turn into smoke and ashes and that kind of a thing. But it wasn't consumed. And so there's this miraculous sight where the normal, like scientific, we would say, processes where wood turns into smoke and turns into ash. All of that is not taking place. It's just heat and light, but the bush appears to be okay. So there's something very, very strange going on here. And Moses said, I love when they think out loud, and it's just like clearly the only human reaction. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. I think every last one of us would have been like, I don't know how you would have said it, but in some language or accent, you would have been like, let me see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. So that's what everyone would have done. Let's double click on that and be like, what is that? And zoom in. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush. So now we've got one of the most famous encounters in history between God and humans. This is a big, big moment, very famous moment. God called to him out of the bush saying, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. which echoes what Abraham said, by the way, in Genesis several times as God was calling out to Abraham, "Here I am." So we're clearly in the same lineage. That's intentional. Then he said, "Do not come near," God said, "do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." Holy means to be separated for special use, to be clean, to not be like other things, okay? To be holy is to be devoted to something, almost like the word consecrated. You know, I think with a word like holy, sometimes it becomes so familiar. We know it's loosely tied to God or religion, but we don't really have a sharp definition. Here's a sharp definition. To be holy is to be separated and set apart for a special use. Of course, tied to God, a special use defined by God, but holiness is to be special, okay? If you're going through like an old box and you're like, okay, muddy shoe, dirty this, dirty that, and then you're like, oh, a spoon. That goes in a different pile if you're ever going to use it again, all right? That's got to be cleaned up. It's a different standard for clean all of a sudden. It's now going to be holy. It's not going to be like the rest of things that you found in this dusty old place. It's going to be holy and it's going to be set apart. So God says this ground is not like any other patch of ground anywhere on the face of the earth for these minutes at least. This is holy ground. Remove your shoes. And God said, this is a revelation of himself, meaning to be revealed. That's what revelation means, to reveal oneself. God is revealing himself voluntarily. Keep in mind, he didn't have to do this. We get bored when we read the Bible because we presume God has to do this. And then God revealed himself, and then God revealed himself. We read it with the presumption of like, yeah, if he didn't, there wouldn't be a story. Listen, he didn't have to do this, but he does. And he says, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." Say this, by the way, that's his name, you know? And I love that because it doesn't really submit to the naming conventions of humanity or the naming conventions of the polytheistic world of the ancient Near East. In other words, he bucks all convention. He doesn't even give himself a name. He names himself sheer being, which is not submitting to like, you know, he's not like, you know, I'm Joe, you know, or what have you. You know, it's like, I will be what I will be. Joe's a fantastic name, but it's not as good as I will be what I will be. So God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent you." Sheer being has sent you. God also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, the Lord," that's I am the God of your fathers. It's the same Hebrew word carried through. If you ever see Lord in all caps in your Old Testament, that's most Bible's way of telling you, regular Lord, you know, capital L and then lowercase O-R-D, that's probably a Hebrew word for like master, okay, or Adonai, my master, or my Lord. But if you see the Lord in those all caps, it's telling you it's I am, okay? He's referring back to this. So, "I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations." And that name has become so honored. We know because of intimacy with God, we can say it, read it, pray it directly to God. We can pronounce the Hebrew version of it. God's invited us in. So in an expression of intimacy, we pronounce this name, say this name, celebrate this name. But there are those circles who say, okay, let's veer on the side of reverence. And there are many places where in Jewish history, this word would be considered unpronounceable. You don't say it out loud. You carefully say a different version of it. If you say it out loud, you dodge it. In fact, you don't even write it because whatever you write it on one day might have to be thrown away, and that would be considered disrespect. So you don't even write this name, you know, in some circles. So it's a revere, whether you veer on the side of like respect for this name or whether you veer on the side of intimacy and feel comfortable using this particular name. One thing is clear. God revealed himself to Moses in a new way, and Moses had an encounter with God. Moses had a real encounter with the real God. And by the way, all healthy leaders do. So let's say this. Maybe not in this way. Don't have to have seen a burning bush, but you need to have interacted with God, or you're probably not well enough to handle other people. So healthy leaders have met God. Healthy leaders, and by here I mean Christian leaders, healthy leaders have met God. At some point, they've had an experience where God spoke to them, They know God through Jesus Christ. They know their identity is in God and not in their leadership or whatever other project they're working on. Healthy leaders have had a genuine encounter with God. And that if a person that is leading you is not downwind from God, you are not downwind from good. Because there is no possible way that a person who's never encountered God can extend the goodness that they don't know. There's no way that a person can extend a grace or a love that they don't know. You can't share what you don't have. And so therefore, healthy leaders have met God. It's always been this way. You remember in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, it says a very particular sentence one time about Peter and the disciples. They recognized that they had been with Jesus. So that will tell you there was something about the way that the disciples were going about their early ministry in the first century that people could tell, they're downwind from God. They've met God. They've been around Jesus Christ. There's something about them. They've hung out with Jesus. Like they know God. And anybody who wants to exert a genuine influence of genuine good is going to be downwind from the genuine love of God. And if it's not, it's really not going to go well. One of the episodes from early American history that I find humorous, which overlaps with this, is there was an early student protest at Yale, and I'm talking about early, like in the 1700s. This is when it was basically a seminary. It was a Christian school at the time for training up Christian leaders. And the Great Awakening, the first one, like the original one, was sweeping the American colonies and then soon to be in England as well. So there's a major revival going on. And a lot of times that doesn't start with the people in power. It starts with the youth. You know what I mean? So the students at Yale of 300 years ago are undergoing a radical spiritual thing where there's just so much more passion and there's so much more joy. And they're realizing, I think we're being converted. I think we've met God. Like, I think we are being converted from like traditionalism to like, I think we know God. You know, I think he's really touched our hearts and we're really meeting God. But then they turn to their professors and we're like less impressed and decide, I don't think any of the faculty here have met God. So they start protesting, actually, because their professors, they believe, were not spiritual enough to actually lead them. They didn't believe that their leaders were healthy enough to lead because they believed that they had not met God. And I wish I could tell you that the administration responded well. They published something that said, anyone who calls a faculty member unconverted shall be expelled. So it was that big of a deal. Like, school was literally ceasing to function. And they were accusing the students that, you know, it was disrespect of elders and all that. And there was probably some of that in there, to be clear. But I would have to side with the students, I think, that no Christian environment can be led by unchristian people. Like no healthy person in that kind of a place hasn't met God. In other words, everyone has. So is this person downwind from the grace of God? Like, that's the first thing. You don't have to be a mind reader to find that out. Just watch a little bit and you'll just be able to tell, has God really humbled this person? Healthy leaders are born from the school of humility. They're graduates of the school of humility and brokenness. And when you can tell this is a broken person who has met God, that's the kind of person you want to follow. This story goes on with Moses. God tells Moses, go. Now he starts to give an assignment. Go and gather, there's two commands, first go, then gather, the elders of Israel together and say, part 3, now say something. Say to them, the Lord, I am, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what's been done to you in Egypt. They were in oppression and had been enslaved for 400 years. And God says, I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. So God says, go and gather the people and tell them that the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who, even though there's no Bible at this point, orally has been passed down. They know good and well that there was a God who appeared to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, orally passed down what would come to be the book of Genesis. And so they've told this down through the ages, and Moses is to go to them and say, I know that we have been slaves for 400 years, but the God who founded this nation, now was a person, then a family, now a nation that's under oppression, God has spoken to me, and he said he is going to bring us to a better place, a promised land. There is, at this point forward, a promised land. If you ever use the phrase, the promised land this, the promised land that, that's this one. This is the original promised land. It's the land that's promised. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go. There's another command. Shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, this is the most powerful person in the world at the time, and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now, please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. These are the 10 plagues being promised. The 10 plagues where God would send miraculous thing after miraculous thing to bring these people lower, because for review, Pharaoh had not met God. He was not a graduate of the school of brokenness, and he did not want to extend the grace of God to people. And then after that, he will let you go. And God says, I will give the people, Pharaoh's another story, but I will give these people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty. There's another part of the assignment. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall, for another part of the assignment, put them on your sons and your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. So if you're listening, you have to think this is low likelihood, to say the least. So first off, the entire nation is slaves. You want us to go to the boss and say, God, the God he doesn't believe in, has said, let us go out. He's not going to. Then God's going to basically force him to. And then you want us to just go to our Egyptian neighbors and be like, hey, can we have your jewelry? And they're going to say, yeah. And then you're going to just walk out of here? That's what you think is going to happen. That's the assignment. But as crazy as it sounds, that's the assignment that God gave Moses, and that's the assignment he would carry out. And so healthy leaders receive their assignment, and receive would be the active word there. That means they're not making it up as they go. Healthy leaders have been told what to do by God. There's a calling factor on their life. This is for you if you're discerning leadership for yourself. This is you if you are looking to pick a job, if you are thinking about where to serve or in which church, this or that. Healthy leaders, you want somebody who seems to be on assignment from God, not a person who is making it up as they go. That's like getting in a car. Can you imagine getting in an Uber and they're like, normally they say, hey, what's your name? And they got it tight. And they're like, so we're going to such and such address, right? And they got it tight. I mean, imagine getting in an Uber and being like, and they're like, where are we going? And you say, you tell me for security purposes. And they're like, I don't know. I'll just make it up as I go. Would you stay in the car? What if they said, I don't really know who I am until a little trial and error? You'd be like, I can't go along that ride. I cannot be a part of your therapeutic journey, man. I really can't. I'm for you. I hope you figure that out. I'm just saying I can't be in this car while you're figuring it out, right? And so similarly, I would not pick a leader that doesn't know yet who they are or what God's told him to do, That's just not a car. That's not a car ride you can afford to be in. And I'm sad to say that sometimes, against all attempts to the contrary, people slip into pastoral roles or church ministry roles with no idea who they are or what God's called them to do, and everybody else just kind of ends up somehow along for the ride, I mean, wouldn't you think about this? Wouldn't you want to feel like at Mission City, wouldn't you want to think, you might never have thought about this, I don't expect this is taking up a lot of brain space, but if you were to get on the subject, wouldn't you want to feel like God had told me to do this? Or would you want to feel like, yeah, Garrett's, I think he's just feeling his way through it. I think he, is just making it up as we go here. I don't think you would want to feel that way. I think you would want to feel like God said we should do this, or within the church planting, this decision or that decision. We want to feel like it's an assignment from God. And you should want to feel that instinct. If I was out here, nobody would want to be a part of something where somebody's just kind of, well, I'm trying to figure out who I am here, and I'm basically using you all to do it. Thanks for being here. That's just not going to work, right? Healthy leaders have received something. They're not making it up. They're not having to force themselves forward. It's like, I'll die if I don't because God told me to. That's the energy that you should be getting from a healthy leader. I will explode if I don't obey God because the great I am sent me to do something, and I'm going to do it, or everything that matters to me and my spirit dies, and I got to do it. And so if you don't like it, I'm not saying you got to do it. I'm saying I got to do it. And that is the energy that a healthy leader has just got to have. Healthy leaders receive it. They don't create it. And that's massively countercultural, because our culture is going to tell you to create, to self-discover, and self-express in a cycle forever. We don't really have a good cultural category in the secular find yourself, follow your heart world. We don't really have a good category for receiving assignment from a living and breathing God. We're kind of coaching each other to do whatever feels good in the moment, and then if you change your mind, just do something else. And we don't really have a good toolkit for discovering callings and what is God, and living life on response to God. Like, life is now a reaction to whatever God has told me to do. And so, but living on assignment is what you could say Christians, healthy followers of God do. We receive our assignment. If someone hasn't been guided by God to do something with their life, I promise you don't want to go along for that roller coaster while they figure it out. Moses does go to the story. He does tell Pharaoh to let them go, true to God's prediction. Pharaoh does say no. God does send 10 plagues on the land of Egypt. They do suffer terribly. The last of the 10 was the death of the firstborn of Egypt, but not of Israel. The hand of the Lord passed over them, thus began Passover. Finally, Pharaoh lets them go, then changes his mind and chases them down until finally we've got a mass number of people who have trusted God and trusted Moses enough to get out into the desert and to actually run. Pharaoh is in a bad mood, to say the least. He suffered everything from miraculous darkness and water in the river turning to blood in the drinking supply, to frogs and diseases, to the loss of his heir, the firstborn son. So he is in a bad mental zone. And so he decides, okay, fine, you can go. And then he decides, actually, no, I'm going to kill every last one of you. So he, as one does when he's Pharaoh, and insane. Okay, so now he has rounded up his army and he's decided, you know what, I'm not going down without a fight. So he decides that he's going to chase them down. So now, if you're one of Moses' followers, now you got water at your back and you got Pharaoh in your face running at you, which is an amazing illustration of the patience of God while we endure discomfort, by the way. Little side illustration here. Amazing how much discomfort. God could have just transported them, to the land. We didn't have to have the dramatic episode. He could have just been and you're up and you're down and you're in the land flowing with milk and honey. But that's not the way that he goes about it. So, and everybody's got to be thinking the same thing. If God brought us here, I'm not sure how long he wants this dramatic pinch to happen. How close do they need to get? Do we need to feel the dust from their horses? Do we need to smell Pharaoh's breath before the water opens behind us? How long is this going to go before God finally makes a way? When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel, and you know what happens? People get mad at Moses. Wouldn't you? People, sure enough, they turn on their leader. Moses, to be clear, just kind of an apology, meaning a defense for the leader here. He's literally only doing what God told him to do. He was minding his business. Remember, he didn't even want to be here, okay? He literally was told to do this. And then, of course, now we got hundreds of thousands of people who are ready to stone him, because after all, they're all going to die anyway. And at least they want the pleasure of seeing him die first. So it is a bad situation. Every last one of them turn on him. So Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They're not even an army. They are a mob. They are a tired 400 years of the body keeping the score tired, right? They are worn down in a way that few of us in this room could ever understand being worn down. And then this is the most powerful army in the region. This is not even going to be a fight. This is going to be bad. So they cry out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, listen to this. They got time for sarcasm, though. Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you took us out here to die in the wilderness? What have you done in bringing us out to Egypt? Notice God has disappeared from the conversation. We don't believe in God anymore. We don't need to talk about God anymore. God didn't bring us out here. You did, bro. So we're looking for a human, now to blame. So what have you done in bringing us out to Egypt? Is this not what we said to you in Egypt? Didn't we tell you, leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. At least we could have lived. I don't know what you would have said. I don't know what I would have said, but probably not what Moses did. I think maybe this is some of Moses' best work probably here, as he kind of repoints these people and these voices in a horribly tense situation, just back to God and back to the goal. And that impresses me so much, because if I was in this tense situation, I'll just be honest with you. I don't know if it would have been this good. Like, I don't know if I could have done this. But here's what he says. Fear not. So fear is driving all that. Like, I'm just going to basically ignore all that nonsense. Fear is driving. That's the real thing. You're talking about graves in Egypt and, wildernesses and all that. This is about fear. So fear not. Stand firm. Quit freaking out. And see the salvation of the Lord. So what a great statement of faith. So Moses is the first to get the faith, and he's the last one to keep it. You will see the salvation of the Lord. So now God's brought back into the conversation. It was a godless accusation before. Humans dragged us out here into the desert, and now humans are going to kill us. Humans. And God said, and Moses says, God is going to continue to save. That's why he brought us this far. See the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today, because if he doesn't, we'll die before sundown, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. Every last one of them is going to die, not you. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. I think that might have been just the only little human part that crept in there. So no more. Okay, so we love that verse. By the way, that's a verse that sometimes will make like the coffee cup kind of thing. Like, the Lord will fight for you. You have only to be silent. There's some truth in that. Also, in context, it's Moses telling a human complainer, "Shh, you need to stop speaking." It's just amazing to me that Moses didn't get dragged off assignment into petty conflict. He could have felt so attacked. He could have gone off. I didn't even choose this. I definitely wouldn't have chosen you, to be along nearest to me so I could hear you of everyone. There's so much that the humanity in him would have wanted to say, but he didn't. He just pointed people back to God, back to the point. It's not about conflict. It's not about me and you. This is about God. So healthy leaders point people to God. Healthy leaders just have this way of pointing people to God. It's like when you get closer to them, you get closer to God, not because God is extra in that person, but because that person points to God extra. They point to God. They just seem to be like, no matter what the subject or the situation, they're going to be that person who's like, what does God have to say on the subject? Let's see as God sees. They just seem to call you higher. A healthy leader is that person who, if you ever had a bad day and kind of like accused them or like blew up on them or just did something like out of character, you just kind of have that confidence that they would have the high road, like that they would take the high road. They wouldn't give you that kind of thing back. When you're around a healthy leader, you have this impression that like, if I do something sloppy, I don't think they're going to return fire. I think it's going to become about God in a good way, in an accurate way, and we're going to keep our eye on the ball here. And I think Moses does that very, very, very well. And you're around a healthy leader, if you have that feeling where you're like, I'm going to send a fiery text message here or email, I'm going to have an off conversation, but the person's healthy when you have the confidence that, if I'm off, they won't be. They're going to take a path back to God. And I'm telling you, I've had some good bosses and I've had some bad bosses, and this is real. With good bosses, there's that feeling of like, if I color outside the lines on accident or even on purpose, that it's just going to be okay, and I'll get reoriented, and it's not going to count against me at the end of the day. But with a bad boss, you can color in the lines, and if you mess up a little bit, it's coming right back at you. It's just an immediate bounce back. And Moses stays above this and calls this critic higher. See the salvation of the Lord. That's what healthy leaders always do. And that's the last thing that Moses does good for a while. So the story goes on. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly to get, so the deliverance happens. I'm fast forwarding again here. The most famous, I would say, water journey probably in history happens. The water literally opens. Many people literally pass through. Some people are like, is this an allegory for the cross? No, this really happened. Okay, so the water literally opens. People literally go across. And the Egyptian army tries to follow. The water literally falls back down on them. And there is a massive defeat for Egypt that day. One skeptical argument is that, how come this isn't in the records of Egypt? Well, let me ask you, would you write it down? Here's the thing. The losing team never writes it down, okay? That's not the way it works, okay? Of course it's not there. Yeah, so this one time we got embarrassed by the true God of the universe. Of course it's not there, okay? So anyway, they come out, and now they're at a new place with new problems. Now they're hungry, and now they're awaiting more guidance from God. Moses and Aaron gathered the whole assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, shall we..." So now the complaints have finally got to him. Okay, the complaints, no more, see the salvation of the Lord. You have only to be silent. Now it is, hear now, you rebels. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock? They're thirsty. And Moses doesn't see fit to honor God, refer to God, praise God, ask for God, or even appear dependent upon God. He kind of says, you want me to do it for you? You want me to do the miracle? He's gotten so used to the miraculous that now he assumes it, presumes it, and arrogantly moves forward without God. Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank. So God granted the miracle and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. See, before this moment, it was the land that I have given you, all of you. But because Moses and Aaron had this presumptive moment where everybody's thirsty, and instead what they should have done was what they had done all along, which is, let's see the salvation of the Lord. Let's trust in him to provide. Let's remember he is the one who gets the credit and has the power to make water come out of miraculous places. Let's remember that he already passed us through the Red Sea and he didn't bring us out here to die. When you follow God, it's never a dead end. If it feels like a dead end, just wait. Let's see what he's going to do. That would have been the same kind of faithful leadership that he had done before. But then this time, they don't do it. Moses and Aaron decide, we're so used to being so close as an intermediary. We're so used to being close to the power of God that we'll just act like we have the authority to distribute it. And we will get so calloused and comfortable of being near God's divine and special power that we'll just act like we've got the power and then we'll just do it. And by the way, we're tired of people too. And so we're just going to pop off like we have the power. And that dishonored God. And it costed them greatly, by the way, because in that moment, the promised land idea was still very much alive and well, just not for them. And they died on the other side of the river looking at the land that would later be their descendants, but never theirs. So this leadership failure had major, major consequences for them. And by the way, that kind of antsiness, you can smell it on a pastor, ministry, or whatever, and it just kind of gives you that feeling like, okay, I don't want to be presumptive myself here, but I think Pastor Man has been handling a microphone for 30 years, and he likes it, and he's used to it, and it doesn't feel like it's coming from humility and dependence anymore, and it just feels like you want me to do the miracle, and like he's forgotten that he can't do any. He's forgotten somehow that God is the one who touches people's lives, not the crafted sermon or the meeting or whatever, right? It's God who does it. This disease is around, and it hits Moses, even the great Moses, who we've held up as a positive example thus far. So let's remember this. Even the healthiest leaders are still human. This will spare you a lot of pain and naiveness. Healthy leaders are still human. That means they have the capacity to fail. Even the healthiest people have the capacity to fail. This is unsettling, but it beats naiveness, because the punishment for naiveness is absolute bitterness. If you're naive and you think, well, that person won't fail because they've been a pastor since I was a kid. Well, that person can't fail because it's my dad. Well, that person can't fail because it's my uncle. Well, that person can't fail because they're the one who led me to the Lord in the first place. That person can't fail because it's my brother. That person can't fail because it's my sister. That person, if you start playing that game, something is going to happen where you're going to get a big reminder, oh, they're as human as everybody else. And if you've been naive and you've forgotten that, what's going to happen is you're going to get very bitter and very disillusioned. I would spare you that ahead of time. Even the healthiest leaders are still human. It doesn't mean, by the way, I'm not saying this as in like, therefore we should all make room for nonsensical, unhealthy leadership. On the contrary, I'm saying I'm trying to remove the shock value. Don't be shocked. Just don't be shocked when even the healthiest leaders have unhealthy moments. I'm not saying we encourage it. I'm not saying we wink at it and act like it's not a big deal. I'm just saying it's possible. And that, by the way, does pack in a little bit of unsettledness if you want into leadership. It says, some of you are like, this feels like judgment. You're right. The New Testament actually says, not many of you should aspire to be teachers because you will be judged more strictly. So yes, the standard is high for leadership. And even the healthiest leaders still are human, and don't forget that. It doesn't mean, I'm not trying to steer you into over-suspicion. I mean, Scripture is clear. Leaders have authority. They deserve respect. Even the word submission is used of pastors in the New Testament. So there is a sense in which we're not trying to become a rabble that doesn't understand how to respond to spiritual authority. I'm just telling you, even spiritual authority is human beings. They're still human beings. Don't forget it. And just check on yourself. Have you veered so far into like protest that you don't know how to like submit and follow spiritual authority? Or have you veered so far into spiritual authority that you've forgotten that they're not perfect? You know, like your pastor is not the fourth extension of the Trinity. You know, it's just not the way that it works. And nobody would say something that ridiculous, but in some church cultures, it just kind of gets in the water somehow that pastor is above somehow, or church staffer is above, or this woman is above because she's been matriarch of the church for 50 years or something. But even the healthiest leaders are still human. One more trip back to the text for Moses, at least. So the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Make him stand before Eleazar the priest and all the congregation. You shall commission him in their sight. Well, commission him to do what? Well, everything Moses does. You shall invest him with some of your authority, so that all the congregation of the people of Israel may obey. And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. That's the lots that they would cast, and God would give an answer. At his word, at Joshua's word, they shall go out. And at his word they shall come in, both he and all the people of Israel with him, the whole congregation. Now listen, if Moses wants to have an insecure day, you know what he would say? Hey, that's my job. I'm the one who tells everybody go, everybody come back, everybody gather. This is what God says. And Moses got used to, for decades, being the one who said, thus says the Lord. And he got used to that role. And God says, I want Joshua to do that now. And you give him your role. And Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua, made him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole congregation, laid his hands on him, and commissioned him as the Lord directed through Moses. So healthy leaders give away their role. Healthy leaders give away their role. Every time. They're looking to give significant responsibility away. Just ask yourself at your company, if you're a leader, you can ask it of yourself. If not, you can ask it of those that lead you. Is this a person who really wants to develop me? Do they have a desire to see me flourish? Are they willing to break off significant parts of their responsibility and share it? Are they interested in me? Do they want Joshua's around, or are all the Joshua's just threats? Because they're so insecure that they gotta have their role, and they don't know who they are without their role, therefore they can't ever bring themselves to share it. Healthy leaders have this sense in which that they are desiring to give away the special place that they occupy and say, you know, if God is so gracious to share it with me, I would love to share it with qualified people, character qualified people who have the competence and the character to display ministry and to give away their ministry. That is a profile, if you will, a crash course in all things Moses. Healthy leaders in review. Healthy leaders have met God. They receive their assignment rather than making it up all the time. They point people to God even when that's very, very challenging. They are still human, so don't build the house on the sand of like human perfection. Healthy leaders give away their role. Most exciting about Moses, though, is who he foreshadows. And let's look here at the person of Christ and who he foreshadows. It says in Deuteronomy 18, a very studied passage written by Moses. The Lord your God, this is a prophecy, it's a prediction, it's very, very clearly a textbook telling of the future. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen. So Moses says there's a greater Moses on the way who will speak for God, who will come from this nation, and who you should listen to. And scholars throughout the centuries have seen that that is indeed a prediction of Jesus Christ, who said these words, by the way, to critics. For if you believed Moses, like if you pride yourself on believing the Old Testament that Moses wrote much of, if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. I am, Jesus is saying, the greater Moses. I am the one who speaks for God. And by the way, Jesus is the only one who would fulfill every criteria. He's the leader we all want. He's the only one who can fulfill every criteria that we really want to be led by in the end. He is the only one who truly is the embodiment of God. He's the only one who is willing to share without the slightest bit of insecurity, to involve us in his work. He's the only one who's never had to apologize and say, whoops, I'm still human. Sorry for letting everybody down. He is the only one who consistently, no matter what, can point people to ultimacy, to God, no matter how much he is snubbed or disbelieved in, no matter how much we ignore him. He is still that patient leader who points us to the way every single time. And by the way, even Jesus Christ received his assignment. You remember what he said? I only do what the Father tells me. I only do what the Father tells me. Like, really? The Son of God? And you're just like on response, you know? And yes, he let the Father be the architect of all that he did. And what he did was to pay for our sins on a cross so that we can relate freely to God. He is the leader that we desire. He's the leader we want. I don't know what your disappointments with leadership are, whether that's at a parental level, church level, no idea. But I can tell you this. Whether you've had good examples that are echoes of Christ, or whether you've had bad examples that are the antithesis of Christ, whether you've seen similarities or whether you've seen opposites, Christ is the one that we are looking for to be the shepherd of our souls. And what we are doing here is entrusting ourselves more and more to his good guidance and to his leadership, because he is the one we are after. The world's best boss cannot create in your heart the realities that Christ can create. The world's best parent cannot create in your heart the realities that Christ and his salvation can create. So let's turn over our lives to him together and pray. God, we give you ourselves as best we can. Lord, however we can scrape ourselves together, we want to do that and then just hand ourselves to you. You said you would raise up a prophet, and you did. Indeed, more than a prophet, our priest and king, Jesus Christ. God, thank you that you have seen fit to share your great work. You tell us to make disciples. We would have guessed that you would do that and that we wouldn't be involved in the process. But Lord, you have not only called us to your grace, but you've called us into the role of representing you in this world, making us ambassadors for you. Lord, I am grateful to know that Moses is not the best we can do. I am grateful to know that we ourselves are not the best that we can do. I am grateful to know that Jesus is the embodiment of all ideals. He's worthy of our worship. And most of all, he is our Savior who brings us into secure and final contact with you. Lord, I pray for healing for anyone who has been just bitterly disappointed, more than usual. Like if there's anyone who has just been bitterly, bitterly touched by church failure, parent failure, pastor failure, leader failure, company and boss failure, government failure, I have no idea. But anyone who has been just really, really hit in their life and heart by unhealth in someone who is in charge. God, I pray that they will just somehow, by your power, see above that experience to see you. Not necessarily to ignore the experience or act like it didn't happen or act like it wasn't important, but just simply to see something additional, which is to look over the top of that experience and see that you are the ultimate version of good. Your goodness is the reason badness can even be noticed elsewhere. We have something to compare it to. You are all that's good. And I pray that you would help anyone responding to these kinds of pain just to be comforted by you and to know that we can entrust ourselves to you and that there will be no harm done as we give ourselves to the true leader and shepherd of our souls. It's in Jesus Christ's name we pray and make that choice. Amen.